Equivocation. This, but also that. A, but also B. This is the dilemma that will occupy this YouTuber, this human, long after Mr. Mobile has posted his last video. And the biggest aggravator of this indecision condition of mine, the phone maker that's made it the hardest to make a choice, is OnePlus. This is the 10 Pro. I'm Michael Fisher, and I think we're both a little lost. But there's nothing wrong with lost, no matter what you might have heard from entertainment reviewers of the last decade, so it would be a mistake to write off the OnePlus 10 Pro without taking full measure of it.
The fact is, OnePlus seems to have finally listened to feedback in some important ways. So let's start out by giving it some credit there.
A new thermal management system keeps the Snapdragon 8 processor performant even for long stretches of 4K videography, or, according to Nick Gray on the Pocket Now Weekly podcast, extended gaming. The weight distribution has been reworked so the phone sits more evenly in a hand, while the optical fingerprint sensor got moved up a few millimeters, so it's even easier to unlock than its predecessor. And those revised haptics work with the new animations and even sound effects to give those unlocks just a touch of whimsy. That sense of attitude is something OnePlus software has always projected, but unfortunately, the recent commingling of OnePlus and its sister brand Oppo has really taken the edge off of that attitude. Kind of like the former punk who takes an office job but still wears fun socks. I mean, the window dressing is still here. For example, you can use this visual representation of your screen time as an always-on display, to make sure your digital shame stays intact. The OnePlus shelf is still here with its specialized widgets, though it's annoyingly placed behind an upper right drop-down swipe now in a possible bid to appeal to iPhone users. I was really excited about the work and life modes because they could be great if they were smart. But in practice, they're blunt instruments that separate the two sides with old-fashioned mollycoddling pop-ups that annoy more than they assist. At least the alert slider is still here. As I've been saying since my first Palm Trio circa 2005, it's the best way to silence a phone in a hurry. And the display is probably the best part of the phone's hardware. Its 1300 nit peak brightness has defeated every potentially debilitating spring sunblast to which I've subjected it. Its variable refresh rate is refreshingly smooth. And OnePlus says it's got better color calibration at lower light levels, but honestly, I didn't really notice a difference. It's a beautiful screen, and that's all there is to it.
I did notice the design, though. And while it's not my favorite OnePlus of all time, I will say I appreciate the effort to stand out.
Emerald Forest is a good name for the color of the green Gorilla Glass 5 backplate with its fingerprint-resistant satin finish. And beneath that sits a battery plenty big enough to hang in there. I've used this thing for 2 weeks and not once succeeded in draining it before bedtime, even on that everyday carry road trip on which I used it pretty extensively. And charging it from empty to full takes a vanishingly small 40 minutes, with a charger that actually comes in the box. And the 10 Pro draws your eye toward its camera module with a rectangular aluminum extrusion that reminds you that this is the second generation Hassel system for phones, with a triple camera array anchored by a 50-megapixel main shooter. Disappointingly, that main sensor is the same as last year, as is the 3.3x telephoto. The only hardware change was to the wide angle, where a new 50-megapixel Samsung JN1 makes it possible to capture 150-degree fisheye photos, and damn do I love them. Whether you use it to squeeze in a sidewalk ice cream shop without backing into the bike lane, or snag a driver's seat selfie from behind the wheel, it's handy added flexibility to an already versatile system. Hasselblad's contribution to the cameras continues to be focused on color tuning, leaving OnePlus one more year to realize the dubious pledge that its high-profile camera partner would one day have input into the hardware. But at least the X-Pan mode is here, for those situations where nothing but a vintage 24x65mm pseudo-panoramic photo will do. And honestly, shooting in this mode brings me much of the same poser joy as that Leica phone did last December. And more importantly, after ages of merely adequate OnePlus cameras, I was surprised to discover, when reviewing the photos, that in some situations I preferred the 10 Pro's shots to those of the Google Pixel 6 Pro, against which it directly competes. Now, that's only sometimes. I still prefer the Pixel overall due to its dedication to dynamic range, which you can see at work here. Notice how Google renders the clouds with the depth and definition they have in real life, while OnePlus can't help but blow them out. But all that Hasselblad color tuning must be doing something, because in other situations, I find the OnePlus better preserves the color and mood or the attitude of the scene, while the Pixel too often tends to bleach it in its single-minded quest to preserve every possible midtone. If this sounds familiar, hey, thanks for subscribing. I said much the same thing in my last round of Apple reviews, and indeed, shooting with the OnePlus feels a lot more like shooting with an iPhone set to rich contrast mode.
But OnePlus had a big opportunity here to really surge ahead if it got the video side right. It made the decision to export that video in the Rec 2020 color space, which, for me, was just a very frustrating and confusing decision.
My friend Danny Winget helped me describe why Rec 2020 makes handling video from a phone more challenging back in my review of the OnePlus 7T. And the company actually seemed to take that note. Last year's 9 Pro delivered video in the more common Rec 709 color space, which I counted as a great victory. When I asked OnePlus why it backslid on this, the company said it was because it knows users will continue to use a wider color gamut that has more vivid and natural colors. Sure, for the 0.01% of users editing professionally in an HDR timeline, that's true. But for everyone else, downloading videos from Google Photos or even pulling them right off the phone, they'll get this. Unnatural saturation that gives folks with flesh tones like mine a permanent digital sunburn and makes the sky look like it was painted by a watercolor marker. Drag me if you want, filmmaking YouTube. I don't want to use a custom LUT on my videos just to accommodate a phone that isn't even targeted at cinematographers. And I think most people would be on my side with regard to that. Oh, and just to top off the video annoyances, the front-facing camera is limited to Full HD instead of 4K. An impressive bungle in an increasingly TikToked world. My speculation is that these decisions are born of the fact that today's OnePlus is, to bring us back to the top, a little bit lost. Halfway between its old personality as a status quo smashing rebel pledging never to settle, and its new incarnation as the conventional contender with just enough standouts at a just low enough price to carve out a sliver of real estate alongside Apple, Samsung, and Google. That price? $899, which, despite my recent tone, I think is more than fair for everything you're getting, and it directly matches the entry-level Pixel 6 Pro. Just keep in mind that 128 gigs of storage will fill up quickly, so you may want to wait for the higher capacity model coming later. AT&T customers, there's no 5G support, sorry. And you won't get official water resistance unless you buy a carrier version. This, but also that. A, but also B. The 10 Pro is an equivocator. It doesn't change the game because the OnePlus of 2022 no longer needs to pretend to. It finds itself not so precariously perched between the people who used to love it and the people who just want a competitive phone, competently executed. There are far more folks in the latter group than the former, which means their money matters more. And for the price, well, the OnePlus 10 Pro is just better than fine enough to keep us all on this hamster wheel for yet another somnolent smartphone cycle. This video was produced following 2 weeks with a OnePlus 10 Pro review sample provided by OnePlus, but as always, neither OnePlus nor any other manufacturer was given copy approval rights or any editorial input concerning this content. The opinions contained herein are mine alone, and I ask you to subscribe to The Mr. Mobile if you enjoyed this video. Until next time, I've been Michael Fisher. Thanks for watching, and stay mobile, my friends.